Our next speaker is László Bodor, Cloud Architect at IBM and AWS User Group Leader in Romania. So László is an experienced cloud architect focused on AWS Cloud, working in IT more than 20 years, and he is now focusing on architecture and building cloud native architecture. We take full advantages of what the AWS Cloud can offer. He has 4 AWS certification. Good job here, included and trainer certification from AWS. Teaching cloud is another one of his passion. He trains students on how to architect for the cloud and also how to solve everyday problem with that in mind. And László is involved in close Romania AWS community. Actually, he is a leader of this community, and he, in his spare time, like to travel and tends his fruits trees. I have the same hobby actually. And László will present the topic centralized endpoint protection across the whole organization using AWS Web Application Firewall and Firewall Management. So please don't forget share your questions with László, and best questions we will send the AWS credits and price from NX. So hi László, and the stage is yours.
Hi Dimitro, hi everyone. I'm glad to be here at this event organized by the Ukrainian AWS community. And I'm here to say that we are besides you, and we're here to make this a great event and be together for a short while. So I will get started with my presentation, which is centralized endpoint protection with AWS WAF and the Firewall Manager. And before I start with my presentation, I would like to just say a few words about me, although Dimitro already did a good introduction. So as he said, I'm a cloud architect. I work now with AWS for 10 years. But my origins, I'm a developer. I worked for many years building projects and systems from small ones to huge ones with millions of visitors. So I'm in the Cluj area in Romania, where I also am involved with the AWS User Group Cluj. And I also do training. I'm an AWS authorized instructor, doing training on architecting on AWS from time to time, besides my main job, which is the cloud architect one. In my free time, I spend time with my son, who is 3 years old, and he is already showing a good career path in IT because he likes to dismantle my laptops. So he has a bright future in this. And I also tend my fruit trees. I have a bunch of fruit trees, and I like very much that activity after work. So let's get started with my presentation, but let's see first the agenda. So I will talk about how to protect your endpoints with the web application firewall. And by endpoints, I mean load balancer endpoints, API gateways, CloudFront distributions, and AppSync. Then I will look at what could be the challenges when you want to do this at scale in a very large organization, how you would do that. And Firewall Manager will come in to help in exactly that regard. So that will be like the third topic. And because I'm a fan of learning by doing, I am also going to do a demo because I think that's the best way to learn, to see how things are exactly done. So actually, I will switch screen to a demo in the last 10 minutes of my presentation. So let's get started. The first topic is endpoint protection using the web application firewall. So why would you need a web application firewall? As you might know, there are a lot of bad actors out there on the internet, and there are all kinds of malicious activities going on. From inoffensive bots, scrapers, crawlers, to more advanced exploits, which are looking to identify the vulnerabilities in your application and steal data or do other malicious activity. And especially now in this context the international context that we have, it's very important that you protect your endpoints at any cost, because that will not only save you data or save your systems from compromise, but it will also help you to reduce the costs of the system, because it will be less usage. So what kind of attacks can the web application firewall protect us from? So there are lots of types of attacks, from simple HTTP floats, which are like volumetric denial of service attacks, and these are designed to overwhelm the targeted endpoint with HTTP requests, and this way denying service to other ones. Then there's also application attacks, which could be SQL injections, which try to run SQL code if you don't escape your inputs. Then there is also cross-site scripting, which tries to inject a piece of malicious code into your trusted websites. And there are other ones. I'm not going to go through these because it's not necessarily the topic. So path traversal, local file inclusion, cross-site request forgery. These are all things that can happen, and we want to protect us from those kinds of exploits. Okay, let's look at what is AWS WAF. And the AWS WAF, or Web Application Firewall, is a cloud native web application firewall, which is like your first line of defense to incoming threats. When you employ the web application firewall, this does not, as I said, not only protect you from malicious activity, but it will reduce your IT consumption, I mean your compute consumption, because basically all those requests which would have come into your endpoint would have consumed resources. And because the web application firewall filters them out, this way they are not getting to your servers or API gateways. You could have like Lambda functions behind your API gateway. So you are paying essentially less compute in this case. The web application firewall from AWS works at layer 7 of the OSI model, so at the application layer. And if you think in the simplest terms, then the web application firewall can allow or block requests to your endpoints based on certain criteria. So for example, you could define, I want to filter out based on IP. I want certain IP addresses to be filtered out. I could want certain countries to be filtered out because I do not want to accept traffic from those countries. Then you could do values in request headers, strings that appear in the request, or the length of the requests. But also you can check for malicious code like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. Now, let's look a little bit at how it works a little bit more in detail. in your web application firewall, you can set up conditions. Like, for example, if a request comes from certain IP, then you have also rules or rule groups. The rules are certain rules that you can define, and the rule groups are groupings of rules that you can have. The rules can be standard rules, which are, as they say, they are standard rules which you define. Then there can be rate-based rules. With rate-based rules, you define a certain number of requests per 5-minute interval. So it could be 1,000 requests or 2,000 requests per 5 minutes. And anything above that will get filtered out by the web application firewall. Then there are also AWS managed rules or third-party managed rules, which are rules that are defined by AWS or third parties. And for the third-party rules, you will have to pay extra. You can also use block, allow, or count for every rule. And you can prioritize the rules. And later I will show you how this works. And you can associate the web application firewall with, as I said, the load balancer, API gateway, or CloudFront or AppSync. So let's look at a little bit more in detail on the rules. As I said, they can be standard or rate limiting. There can be your own or there can be managed rules. And one additional notion that you have to be aware of is the web ACL capacity units. Each WAF can have a maximum of 1,500 VCUs. And the WAF uses the VCU to calculate and control the resources required to run the rules. And both the rules and the rule groups can consume this capacity. I will look a little bit at the rate limiting rules. So how would you employ rate limiting? You can use 3 types of rate limiting. So you can use a blanket rate-based rule. So for example, this will protect you from large HTTP floods. So 5,000 requests per 5 minutes. But then you can also specify URI-specific rate-based rules. So with this, you can protect critical paths like the login path, where you could define a lower rate like 400 requests per 5 minutes. Then you can also add into the mix the IP reputation rate-based rule, where you would set a lower rate for IPs that are deemed suspicious. So for example, you could use the AWS managed rule for IP reputations and then combine it with a rate limiting rule, which would limit those IPs to a lower request rate. But then you could ask, how do I determine rate limits? And rate limits can be determined, at least I used this approach. So direct your logs to an S3 bucket through Kinesis data firehose, and then use Athena to find some current baseline rates. So what are your current rates? And then you would do this for all rate-based types. And of course, you would need to add some extra just not to hit the limit too soon. So what I did, I doubled the current amount and then applied it to the rules. Now I will mention a few of the AWS managed rule groups that you can use. So you have the Amazon IP reputation list, which I use as a baseline protection. So this rule group will flag IPs that are considered suspicious. Then you have the anonymous IP list. So this will filter out all IPs that are, for example, from Tor exit nodes or VPNs or stuff like that. Then there is also a core rule set, which includes like the OWASP top 10 exploits that you could have. Then also known bad inputs. I'm not sure how familiar are you with, for example, last year there was an exploit on Log4j, and the known bad inputs, you could use this to filter out those kinds of exploits. Then there is another important AWS managed rule, which is the boat protection rule. So here you see a graph with traffic distribution, boats versus humans. This is from the Barracuda report. And actually, human traffic is only 36% according to this report from all the traffic. And 25% are good boats, like, for example, Google search engine boat. And the other ones are bad boats. And the boat protection AWS managed rule can filter out these boats. And actually, because this is a rule group, it has additional rules inside it. So you can select, for example, that you want advertising boats excluded or allowed or things like that. So it allows you a little bit of granularity in choosing what kind of protections you want. Then there is the account takeover protection rule group, which is a newer one. And this would you would use on login pages, for example, login forms. And it can detect things like high number of requests coming from an IP, someone trying to do a password traversal or a username traversal. Even using usage of compromised credentials can be detected with this managed rule. This is a newer rule, so it might not be supported in every place, but it's good to know about it. Then there are third-party rules, which can be like these. I'm not going to go into these. These you have to pay an extra fee for these ones, and you don't really have that much visibility into what do they do. But if you need them, you can use them. So these are rules from third parties. I want to talk also about mitigating false positives. So this sometimes happen that a legitimate request is being flagged by the WAF as illegitimate. So this is called a false positive, and these sometimes happen. And this can be mitigated by using the labels and rule priorities. So for example, here we have this diagram. What you would do, you would set up 3 rules. The first rule would be in count mode. In count mode, your requests are not being blocked, just counted, and the label is being emitted. On the second rule, you would check, do I have the label and I am on my form page where this false positive is? So if yes, then allow the request. If not, go to the next rule. And the last rule would check again for the label. And if the label is there, it would block the request. And this works because allow and block are terminating actions. That means that all other processing will stop if the WAF encounters an allow or a block. Count, on the other hand, is not a terminating action. The next rule will be evaluated with a count. But with allow and block, there's no more evaluation. The processing is terminated in WAF. Now, once you deployed your WAF, you would also need to test it. There are a couple of test suites out there to test your WAF. I use this one. So go test WAF. It actually generates a nice chart like this one on how what are your results of your WAF. And you can use this one, of course. A few challenges in case of large organizations. When you have hundreds of AWS accounts, you would have to deploy a WAF ACL in each of the accounts. That could become a problem. You could do this with, for example, CloudFormation, but not in every case that is a good solution. Then you would also have to account for different sets of rules per organizational unit. So, for example, your marketing department might have different rules than what your financial department have. So you would have to tailor the CloudFormation templates. So that's a little bit of overhead. Then you don't have, if you deploy WAF ACLs individually, you don't have a centralized view of components. The thing is that you cannot enforce a baseline set of protections. So for all these challenges, we need to find like a solution. And the solution, what I found and what AWS found, because they developed this, is the Firewall Manager. And the Firewall Manager is actually a tool, a security management tool, which will allow you to centrally configure and manage firewall policies. And it allows you to do across all AWS accounts in an organization, and it will deploy the WAF ACL into these accounts. So with this, you can enable a baseline security posture. You can enforce the protection, so you can say, okay, I want these accounts to use these kinds of WAF ACLs, these kinds of protections. And you also have a centralized view of the compliance posture that you have. Now, some prerequisites for using the Firewall Manager. So first of all, you need to have AWS config enabled, because in the background, it uses AWS config to monitor certain things. You also need to have your accounts in an AWS organization. So then you need to have them organized into an organization. And you will need to designate one account, one AWS account, as the admin account of Firewall Manager. Usually you would do this with the security tooling account. So yeah, these are the 3 prerequisites that you need to have. Then how the Firewall Manager works. It works by defining a Firewall Manager policy, define the policy with rules and applicability settings. And then the Firewall Manager will deploy multiple WAF ACLs into different AWS accounts. And here you have like a diagram of how this works. So you have the security tooling account in the top part of it, where you have Firewall Manager and you have defined the policies. Here we have defined 3 policies, and each policy will then get deployed to a certain account. But you could have only one policy deployed to all accounts. We'll look at the several patterns a little bit later. So the structure of a policy looks like this. You have so-called first rule groups and last rule groups, in which you can add rules. And these are used later in a sense that you can use these for for mitigating false positives, for example. And when the firewall ACL is deployed into an account, these first and last rule groups are not editable by the unit. So for example, the marketing department. You also have some applicability settings. So you can define which AWS accounts it applies to, this policy. You can define also organizational units that you have in AWS organizations, or you can use tags. So all resources which are tagged with, for example, app type mobile. And here you also have the types of resources that you can protect. So API gateway, load balancer, and CloudFront. A simple WAF ACL, so without Firewall Manager, looks like this. So it's only one rule section. And you can have their different rule groups, and you can have an allower block. But when you are using Firewall Manager, it actually looks like this. So the first rule groups, which you have on the top, are coming from the Firewall Manager. The bottom one is also coming from Firewall Manager, and the organizational unit, so the marketing department, cannot modify these, but they can add their own rules in the middle. You can see those rules are added by the organizational unit. You will see this in the demo a little bit better. So here we have a few patterns that we can have with Firewall Manager. So the first pattern is in which you apply some baseline rules from the central account, and then you allow the individual accounts to customize this by adding their own rule groups. But you could also have another pattern, the second one, in which you apply baseline rules from the central account, but you are not allowing anyone to add any customizations to the firewall policy, or sorry, the WAF ACL. Then you have also the third pattern, in which you apply the rules from the central security tooling account, and you can apply different rules based on different accounts. So apply one rule for one account and another rule to another account. Then the fourth and last pattern is when you use the same approach as in the last pattern in third. So you use different rule groups, but you are using tags to differentiate application types. So you can see there tag equals web or tag equals API. And in that case, the policy will be applied only to those specific tags in those accounts. Even if the account has some other resources, it will not apply to all the resources. It will apply only to the resources in question. So some key considerations before you choose Firewall Manager, because we need to think about this. So if you use multiple AWS accounts, like hundreds, then Firewall Manager is a serious consideration for you. But you also need to have a central security team, which defines these rules and applies the policies to the accounts. Because if you don't have a central security team and each unit manages its own security, then this might not be the best pattern for you. Also, if you need to enforce the rules, then Firewall Manager is a good choice. And here I want to do a little bit of a demo. Allow me just a little bit of, okay. So I'm here in the my organization administrator account. So I have this account and I have two other accounts in this organization. So first thing I would do when I come to Firewall Manager, so Firewall Manager is together with WAF and Shield. And I need to come here and set an administrator account. So I designated this one. But when you first come here, you need to fill in this account. Then you can go to security policies and define a policy. So If you choose global, you then define CloudFront policies, but I will choose the Frankfurt region and I will create a policy. So I can choose between several different types of policies because Firewall Manager supports some other types of policies, but in this case, I'm only using WAF, so I will choose WAF. Let's call this demo policy. Then I can add some rule groups. Here, it waits a bit. It always waits a bit. It doesn't matter how fast your internet connection is. It always waits a little bit to add these rule groups. So just a moment. So I will choose an AWS manage rule. So let's use the core rule set, for example, and click on add. And then I can define what will be the default action if there is no match for any rules. I leave it on allow. Then I can do login configuration, but I will leave it on disabled. I leave enable sample requests. And here you can choose a policy action, only identify the resources or auto-remediate the non-compliant resources. I will leave it on identify and click on next. I want to include all accounts under my AWS organization. I could choose to add it only to certain accounts, or I could exclude some accounts, but I will leave it on include all. And you could only apply it to certain tags if the resource has certain tags, but let's leave it at this. Yeah, and I have to choose which type of resources it applies to. So API gateway stage and application load balancer. Click on next, add tags. I will not add tags now. Click on next and then create. And once I created this policy, it will show up here. Just a moment. What it will happen, it will deploy a web ACL. Right now, I don't have any web ACL here, but it will deploy in this account and all the other accounts as well. So while it does that, let's switch to the other account I have on Unit 1. So I'm now switching to a different AWS account. Here, I see it already deployed managed web ACL. In this account, I also have an API gateway, which I want to protect. I've created the API gateway beforehand. And if I open it, this is my API. And here, if I open the policy, this is not yet associated with my API gateway. Let's keep that in mind. And I can see the rules. So I have the first rule section I've talked to you about. This is the rules from Firewall Manager policy. So it's AWS Managed Rules, common rule set. I cannot modify this one, but I could add my own rules. I will not add it yet. I just wanted to show you this. So let's switch back to the main account because I want to show you. If I go back to security policies, here, when I go to my demo policy, it will identify what accounts I have here. Just a moment. This always takes time. This is something specific, I think, to Firewall Manager. Okay, so you can see it identifies which accounts are within the policy scope. It says this account is non-compliant and it requires changes in related services. This is because I don't have AWS config enabled in that account. Then this account is non-compliant and this account is compliant. I'm in this account now. This one is compliant because it doesn't have any resources. It doesn't have an API gateway or load balancer. But this one, which has the API, it says that I have some non-compliant resources, and this one is the API gateway stage. So let's click on the other account switch to that one, and let's associate the API gateway with that WAF ACL. So I will come here, edit it, and I will associate the WAF ACL to this API gateway, add. And I will also do something else. I will add another rule. But before I do that, let's check, can I load the API? This is a GET request to the API, so it still loads. But what I will do now, I will go here and add a rule. So I'm now in the unit account, so the organizational unit, let's say the marketing department. And I will add my own rule, and I will say block Romania, for example. And this is a custom rule I'm creating. And if the request originates from a country, let's say Romania, and I'm adding this here, and it will be blocked, add rule. So now my WAF ACL has two rules. So the one that is coming from the Firewall Manager and the one that I've defined. And I could have another one in here in the last rule group. If I go back to my API now, I should get some error. Sure, let's wait a bit. So I'm getting the message forbidden. Okay, now my country is blocked. I cannot access the API. Let's go back to my main account. Go to Firewall Manager. And open the demo policy. And this will be the last thing we will look at. So because I have associated the the API gateway to the WAF ACL, I should now get my other account compliant because it should be compliant with that. So you can see this account with the 370 is now compliant because I have associated the API gateway with that WAF ACL. So yeah, this was in short what I wanted to present to you, to demo actually.
Thank you, Laszlo. We almost out of time, but let me raise a few questions. So the first one, how application firewall impacts on latency to resources?
Okay, so actually there is a latency impact. We actually tested this, but the latency impact was like 100 milliseconds, which is not something very bad. Of course, this depends on the number of rules you add. The more rules you add to the WAF ACL, it impacts the latency a little bit more. But I think it's still a good trade-off in order to protect your endpoints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100 milliseconds. It's not something bad, really, from performance point of view. You're right. That's great results. And another question: why would you use AWS WAF instead of Cloudflare firewall?
Actually, we are running everything on WAF, and most of the teams already have experience with WAF because some of them started using it before it was centrally implemented. So it also sometimes matters if people have experience with it, know how to set up the rules, know what to look for. And working with AWS and being all in on AWS made it a natural choice for us to use AWS WAF.
Makes sense. Thank you, Laszlo, for your presentation and your time. And if you have some time, please go to Pine Chat, and there are a lot of additional questions to you. Yeah, guys, you will
Okay,
send my
we'll
message
check it.
to Laszlo. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.